Right, hello London Java community, how are you all doing? Woo! That's the spirit. Wonderful stuff. Okay, so hi everyone. As you might have guessed from the enormous letters on the screen, my name is Tom, and for the last 10 years I have been a solution architect. I probably don't need to explain what that means to the group, but pertinently, I have spent a lot of the last 10 years having to explain things to people. That's come in a few different forms. Some of them are long-form workshops, but very frequently it's supporting things like sales staff, where I've got a whole bunch of people in front of me, and I've got maybe an hour of their time, a little bit like we have today, and I've got to develop intuition with them. Okay, often about a technology, a concept, some things of that sort of effect, maybe even a product, right? And the question is, how do I do this? A lot of the time it's doing talks, a bit like the one here. And there's a particular tool I end up having to look an awful, there's a particular tool I end up having to use an awful lot for that, which is PowerPoint. So who's ready to talk about PowerPoint? Again, that's the spirit. But yeah, I don't blame you for the sort of slightly lackluster reaction to that. I mean, let's face it, I don't think PowerPoint has ever been a word which anyone has ever said with a real like gusto, yeah, let's go get it. And it's understandable. So there's a little bit delayed. And it's understandable. I mean, let's face it, I think we've all probably sat through decks which look something like this. I personally had to sit through this at university. The course actually got cancelled afterwards because it got so many complaints, not just because of the slides, it's worth saying. And I had to give this one myself. Actually, I had to give the old version of this. This is the newer version, which is better. The old version was just undeserving of human eyes. But I mean, I think we're all aware that PowerPoint's got a pretty shoddy reputation, right? But the thing is, I don't actually think it deserves that reputation, odd as it sounds. I actually think that if you use correctly, it's your greatest secret weapon doing this, okay? And hear me out, right? What you have here is a canvas which you are in complete control of. Now, obviously, I'm sat here, I'm talking to you, but there are some things which are kind of difficult to articulate. Sometimes using visual metaphors are better. You can put diagrams up there, you can put charts to substantiate what you're saying. Even if you, like at basics, you can just put what I've said up to remind everybody what the major points are. Like, this is incredibly handy, and like I said, it's your greatest secret weapon if you're using it. So, what I present to you guys today, slightly backwards from how one normally does a slide, is a talk called Introduction to Information Design. So this is a talk I've done in various stages throughout the last couple of years. And basically what it was born out of is seeing lots of PowerPoints like the ones we've just saw on the last slide, but being a bit sort of annoyed that they keep sort of happening. And yeah, we all have to do stuff like this, so I figured why not just write a crash course in how to do this stuff, okay? Now, obviously, I've only got about 45 minutes here, so this is going to be a very like fast pitch thing. Feel free to pepper me with questions at the end of it. But without further ado, let's go. That said, let's stop before we go, okay? Now, stop before you make a PowerPoint, because I want to ask you, why are you doing this? And I appreciate some of you are probably sat here right now thinking, God, why am I doing this? Like, why am I listening to him talk about PowerPoints? But I don't mean this in that sense, although I don't blame you. I'm more in the sense of, like, why are you doing a talk, okay? If you're in a position where you're going to sit down and do one, and I ask this because I have seen so many talks which were probably just better handouts or better blog posts and that sort of stuff. Like, and to put this to you, like, why not do one, right? You can read considerably faster than you can listen, right? Articles, if you sit down and write a well-done blog post, you can refine them an awful lot of times. You can add extra information to them. All the visual content I've mentioned, you can put video into them as well. It's much easier to do. And also, not for nothing, you can go at your own pace. You can't press pause on it. Well, you can, I suppose, and ask me questions to go back. But, you know, with a video, you can literally stop it and rewind. With an article, you can stop. If you just want to go through a particular tangent on something you don't understand, you can Google it, you can chat GPT it, whatever. You go at your own pace. With me, we're kind of doing it live, right? And especially if we're doing it on a sort of technology subject, if there's a little bit you don't understand, sure, you can grab the speaker and ask them a question. But if you're holed up on that detail, you're kind of being dragged by the horse at that point, okay? That said, it's not all bad. I actually think talks are great. Probably wouldn't be doing one if I'd hated them completely. They're good for a few things. First of all, let's be honest, live speech is kind of more engaging than I'm just watching videos, right? Second one is, even though I've just kind of like, you know, dumbed down the idea you can ask questions, you do have someone who's theoretically at least knowledgeable about the subject who is talking to you. Whereas I think we've all punched things into ChatGPT and got quasi answers out which don't quite seem accurate. Also, this is really easily kept up to date. Again, I'm doing this live. I could write a blog post, but I think any of us who work for large corporates, even smaller ones, will know fully well that if you want to go and update that, there are so many hoops you've got to jump through, it's just not worth it, unless it's on your own one, of course. But if something happens in the hour before my talk, I can incorporate that. I can tailor what's in the talk to the audience. We can mix and match it as per the situation, right? But I don't bring all of this up to compare and contrast talks versus videos and that sort of thing. What I bring this up is to make a point. Talks and PowerPoints are just one way to communicate a point to people, okay? And seriously, if you want to write an article, just write an article, okay? We have this habit in our culture of lionizing public speaking, and I don't mean to do down, obviously, the situation here, but it's okay to just write articles, okay? So we are here, though, to talk about slides and how to run through it. So how do we make good slides? The rough agenda we got today is I'm going to start off by giving a rough overview of doing structure and content. Again, what we're talking about here is mostly the design side of things, so I'm going to focus on that. Then we'll run through the design principles, and then very specifically, how do you do this with text, color, diagrams, and a little bit of page layout, basically. Some lovely dorky subjects. Right, so first things first, though, or not first, if you're going to do a talk like this and make your PowerPoint, it should be the last thing you do. And I know that sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but that's actually for a really good reason. Your slides are a function of your content, right? You can make the prettiest slides in the world, but if the content you're going to articulate with them isn't really substantive, it doesn't really get anything across, there's no point having them, right? So leave them to the end. There's another couple of points with this as well. The first one is that if you're not quite sure what slides you're going to do, what the points you're going to bring up, even if you do, you can spend ages on Keynote or PowerPoint or whatever, faffing around and making it look pretty. I know that I do, I love doing it, but it's a massive time sink. The other practical thing as well is that if you've got your script, which is what you want to say, and you make a change in it and you've got your slides, you've got to then go change them. The easiest slides to change are ones which do not exist, right? So start with your script. So if we're not starting with PowerPoint, what are the tools of choice, so to speak? Well, seriously, Word or a pen and paper. And if you don't believe that that's what I'm advocating rather here, this is what this talk looked like. So we've got word vomit here. That's how most of my talks start, not really refined. And then this goes through a few different Word documents until eventually we get this, which is nicely structured, all heavily indented with lots of color coding as well to help me memorize all of it, right? So without further ado, structure and content. I'm basically going to start off with 7 rules-ish to do sort of the major flow of your deck and then how you should run into them. So first things first, what's your end state, right? You know, going back to this thing of like, why are you doing this? But less on the existential, why am I listening to Tom Rabbit about PowerPoints, and more just in a general sense of you are trying to communicate something to people, right? Like talk, blog, whatever. The point is you've got an audience and you're trying to put a point to them. What's the end state you're trying to get to? And who are your audience for that matter? And what are they going to use this information for? So I often service 2 different sorts of audiences. You've got business audiences who, if you're doing client projects with, they're going to need to take whatever it is and factor it into their roadmap more generally. Then you've got technical audiences who might want to understand the minutiae of that. How does it input with our stack? You might just be pitching like a new tool to your team, for instance. How does this work with our workflow? And this should influence what points are you going to need to cover to get there. And again, keeps harking back to who are your audience, right? Really big question with this is how much familiarity do they have with the subject? Again, if it's your own team, they might probably know quite a bit. You don't have to skip the preamble. Business audiences, I find you do have to go in for a bit of a preamble, usually something a bit more high level and intuitive, but they're not going to be familiar. Either way, though, once you've got your points, you order them by dependency, is usually like I say. So I know there's a big sort of thing of, shift left and address stuff really early in software engineering. I would actually advocate almost the opposite with this. You want to start lean and build up, right? If a point is not directly relevant to what you're trying to put forward here, and this is not to say put nothing onto your slides or make a point, but if you're bringing up information which isn't directly relevant, skip it and leave it. Even if it's essential to the wider point, just shift right on it almost, and just delay introducing ideas as long as possible. So the reason you want to do this is because the way you're going to structure your deck is what I call follow the next natural question, okay? You're going to bring up a point, and inevitably, you're not going to cover everything about it, but you're going to preempt, what is the audience going to guess, right? What's the next thing they're trying to think? And then that should be the next thing that leads you onto your next point. And what this gives is a nice intuitive flow to your deck, right? Obviously, you can't do this with every point and everything you're going to bring up, but trying to follow it as best as possible. So the next tenant I have, answer the bloody question. Seriously, the amount of decks I've sat through, particularly technical ones, which don't do this or go off on random tangents. One of the most egregious offenders of this actually was that thing that I pointed to earlier, which included an entire slide talking about how SHA-256 was derived from first principles. This, by the way, is in the context of how hashes are used in blockchain. I mean, sure, if you want to go implement your own instance of it, perhaps relevant, but I would contend that if you just want to understand what they're used for in terms of data integrity and tamper-proofing, not really relevant. You just need to understand that they're a fingerprint, really, and get the minutiae from that. Oh, just one thing on this before I go. Don't name drop and introduce jargon either. I know, again, this is a habit that sometimes I do this as well, but if you're going to bring things up, make sure that the whole audience are going to understand it first. Seriously, it doesn't sound clever if people are dropping the names of, I mean, again, egregious examples I've heard of this, like US security licenses that you have to get and like obscure laws and that sort of stuff. It's like, it just makes the talk a little bit wasteful because everyone's standing around going, what is that? So next thing, analogies and familiar ideas. Much more useful with business audiences, but I would say even with fellow techies, it's quite handy as well. A really big thing for this, though, is that if you can relate ideas to what people know already, you have to spend less time building it up. They already understand those things intuitively, and this is what I'm getting at, the intuition here. So you can relate it to that. There's less time spent building things up in the first place. Oh, yeah. So the next one is, I think we've all, I imagine we've all built things like this before. So big solution diagram, right? Don't put this on screen at the same time. Okay, again, beautiful piece of work. I mean, I don't know, I just got this with Google. Beautiful piece of work, I'm sure, not disputing the majesty of the design, but this is a lot of stuff, right? I don't know where I'm supposed to be looking at it, okay? So my next rule is explain complex ideas and stages. Again, it sounds like I'm probably stating the obvious here, but this has not been put towards me in easy to consume chunks. And my eyes are darting around trying to work out where it is. I mean, granted, there's actually a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but it's still a massive diagram. That doesn't just apply to system diagrams, by the way, just any sort of concept, stage the information. And the final one is remember to recontextualize. So you should start out with the end state, like I said, and you're getting your points. But remind everybody what your end state is. Because ultimately, if you have this bird's eye view and the audience know what the bird's eye view is, when you're going off on points which seem a bit more tangential and a bit less relevant, it's much easier for them to ground it and work out where the North Star is and how it relates to that. So on the subject of that, to remind everybody, we're doing a talk about how you make PowerPoints. But to give a more serious thing of that, my goal at the end of this is I'd like everyone to have a sort of intuitive idea, roughly, of the do's and don'ts of how you actually design the decks, basically, what works and what doesn't and why. Though, again, the big sort of point with all of this, and I've sort of to reiterate the same thing again, is that for each point slide thing you're going to say, do ask yourself, so what? Again, is it relevant? Is it going to directly advance getting to this North Star, this final state, right? And as I kept saying again, start, lean, and build up. You can, well, even though I'm advocating shift right and everything, you can go and pepper something with more and more detail if you think it is relevant. But the point is if you've structured it in this lean way which goes forward, you can go back and do that instead of having to wrestle stuff out of it. Yep. And the final note on all of this is ideas are cheap. The reason I'm saying that you should start with Word, by the way, is that if you take a whole section of that, copy it out, put it into another document, put it back in again, that is really easy to do. It takes virtually no time to type out some new ideas on Word. Ideas are cheap. Take a real kill your darlings approach to this. I mean, don't actually kill anybody, by the way. It's a figure of speech, but I think you get what I'm trying to say. So let's talk about the meaty design principles, shall we? Right. If you remember nothing else from this talk, I implore you to remember this slide. Okay. Basically, the foundation of information design and most design, I would contend, is something called signal-noise ratio. Okay. In any sort of visual medium, you have stuff that's going on. And then among that stuff, you have the signal, right? The stuff is the noise. The signal is the bit that's what's relevant to what you're talking about. And the noise is everything else, okay? Information design is the art of making sure that the signal is not lost in the noise. Or to put it a little bit more bluntly, I've got a load of stuff on screen. Are you paying attention to the thing I want you to pay attention to, right? Again, think about that system diagram. If you're standing there like trying to like get the third thing, my eyes are still darting around unless we've subdued the rest of it a little bit, okay? So how do we do this? Pardon me. How do we separate the signal from noise? So a few more tenets for you. First of all, clean, minimalist designs. As you might have noticed with these decks so far, I do not have an awful lot on my slides. It's most, I mean, granted, it's just one line at the moment, but it's mostly just white space, right? We've got a handful of like highlights here, but it's quite minimalist. And what that means is the content that's on there stands out quite a lot. And it means the highlights stand out as well. The next one is make sure it's visible from the back of the room. And to do this, I literally mean walk to the, I'm not going to walk all the way back there, but like walk to the back of your lounge, your bedroom or whatever, open up your laptop screen or your desktop monitor. Can you read the main points on it, right? Because if you can't read the main points there, the people in your audience won't be able to read them either. Next one, sort of a bit of an echo of clean minimalist designs, but I think it bears like repeating by itself. Make sure everything has space to breathe, right? The worst way to do noise is to have everything like crunched up into itself. So think about your content needs to be lying on the bed and stretching out like that, right? And again, the reason for this is you see there's lots of white space here, which means the content stands out a bit more, which means that when we have the highlights here, they stand out a little bit more because they're not competing with your attention as much. And finally, to sort of echo the points I'm getting at a lot, direct your audience with contrast and staging, okay? Contrast is all about weight, so like how thick things are, symbology that you're using, color. Staging is what I've seen here, where you're introducing things one bit at a time, building it up, because your eyes are naturally going to lock onto whatever the new thing is, right? This is the bread and butter. So text is going to be the bread and butter, sorry, text is rather the bread and butter of your deck. So let's look on that as an example of how to do this practically. So what do I use text for? Well, first of all, I use it to summarize the stuff that I'm talking about, obviously. Quite handy to just sort of say it to reinforce it to everybody. Partly I do that to find my place if I get lost mid-talk, especially for like the aspiring speakers among us and anyone in the audience. I really cannot recommend learning the subtle art of, I have lost where I am, I'm going to gesture gracefully to the deck and hope that I can work it out in a few seconds. There's also the, I've lost where I am, I'm going to gesture gracefully over to my water bottle and hope that I can find my spot as well. You'd be amazed how much that works really well. But you can find it. This part, honestly, helps me a lot. The other thing is it'll help you guys as well. I'll be completely honest, I drift off all the time during talks. I'm really terrible for it, even at work if I get bored of them, honestly. But it's really handy, actually, because if someone's made a point of putting the major points on there, I can drift back. Oh, it's worth saying, I might not just be bored. I might just have to like answer an email on my phone or something that's quite urgent. Someone sent me a Slack message that I've got to respond to pretty quickly. We all have these situations. But again, it gives you an anchor point because you can jump back in, I can listen to what you're saying and recontextualize myself very easily. And final one is adding extra content for later. Right, so I realize I said right at the beginning of this talk, no writing articles, article or talk. There is no neither shall the two mix, you know, but you can blend the two together-ish. And this is my whole sort of point about signal noise ratio, and this is how you can do it. It's all about balancing the two. So when does text become a wall? Would anyone like to hazard a guess?
Too much text.
Too much text? Yeah. Pretty much. But how much is too much text?
When you start reading from slides, when you start reading from
yeah, pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. When you get lost in there. So I would sort of say, to relate to what we just said, is when the signal's lost in the noise, right? If you're just like standing in it, it's just like that, that's when there's too much, right? And this is what I'm getting at with how you mediate the two of them. When you got text, your signals, right? Signals and noise, your signals are the key words, right? The main things that your audience needs to take away from any slide that's on there. So how do we do this practically? Oh yeah, so sorry, at a glance, going back to my stand at the back of the room thing, at a glance, your audience should be able to read the keywords on there, a bit like how I've made a point of like highlighting here. They should be able to look at the slide and immediately know what you're supposed to be talking about. So you've already seen a version of this already. Actually, these, yeah, they're going to pop up. Yeah, you've already seen a version of how I've done this already. Okay, so for the intro marks here, you'll notice that these headings are made much bigger than the text next to them. They're in big primary colors to alert you to them. They're also bold. The other thing as well I've done importantly is I've muted all the text beneath them. Now, I know that this makes this difficult to read, and I have deliberately made it difficult to read because I don't want you reading it. This is what I'm saying, but the point is, going back to how do you strike the balance of notes for later versus notes for now, is that, I mean, happy to distribute these slides afterwards, but this means is that you can sit at home or at work or something and read through this at your own pace. Then you will be able to read this perfectly. But for now, we mute it. Those at the front, if you want to like flick through, go for it. But the emphasis here, you are reading those 3 points. There's variations of this as well in terms of designers to show things off. You can also do this with like floating paragraph headings like we've got here. If you want to, you can also telegraph them with icons as well. I find this is a good sort of visual depiction of it as well. I mean, you pick things which are relevant. This is just lorem ipsum I've got. What you can also do as well is what I call words and paragraphs. Here we go. So to sort of show you an example of this. So, well, how I would do hashes. Right, so hashes are fingerprints of data which are cheap to produce. So notice how I'm using the colors which the fingerprint is for the metaphor there. Next one, if you change even a single bit, the whole hash changes. 3 different fingerprints, 3 different colors. We're using those colorings right there to reflect it. And then finally, so we can use them to see if someone's been changed. Again, notice the colors that we're using here, relates it all to it. Again, staged information, right? Also notice I didn't talk about how SHA-256 is derived from first principles. Oh, sorry, one more light note on this. Just sort of forgot to say. See what I mean? Reminding me of my own points. If you're going to do this, I realize this is a bit of a hodgepodge thing here, but if you're going to like highlight stuff, a good strategy I tend to use is, can you get these to form a sort of pseudo sentence, basically? I'm not sure this is the best example, but like if you look at the keywords here, you can almost read them by itself. And obviously it's missing all the proper glue words, but even reading these, you can get the gist of the point I'm trying to make you. And if you can get that to flow through the paragraphs as well, all the better. Generally speaking, to give some more practical examples, I would avoid putting logs on the slide. It is the epitome of noise, basically. But if you are going to put logs onto a slide, again, what I'm saying about here, highlight them, put some kind of annotation onto it to make it clear what it's about. Code, by the way, is something very similar. I mean, obviously, we have syntax highlighting, which actually works for all the reasons that I've said already. It's about signal versus noise, and particularly if you're familiar with a certain color coding, you can zero in on the bits you want. But again, the trouble is code on a slide which you're not familiar with is a bit of a soup, right? You've got to sort of jump through it. So again, make a point of highlighting the bit you want, and I would gray out the bits which are not relevant. Definitely cut it down to the snippet. In both cases, if you want to show off code or logs, really, I would stick to your editor or stick to Grafana or something, or better so, just talk in, you know, diagrams, sentences, describe it using English, right? So to round off with things about text, your font choices matter. So probably not for the reason you think. About 15% of the population have some kind of visual or cognitive impairment that means reading is difficult. And I don't mean like sort of really struggling with it, but dyslexia is one of the most common ones for this. You can actually design around this reasonably accommodatingly. There's a combination of accessible principles that you can be using, and also there are fonts which are designed specifically to be read by people with visual impairments like this. I could probably spend ages talking about this, so I won't. What instead I will do is there's an article which I'll link to in all the links at the back of this, which I'd say everyone should read. That does actually explain the specifics of how to do this. There are also some fonts you can use. So Poppins is what I use throughout this deck. There's also Atkinson Hyperlegible. That's made by the American Braille Association, and that's the sort of gold standard for this sort of thing. So Homer and Verdana, anyone you should be familiar with as well, because they're defaults. But anyway, I'll let you guys go and read this because it's a massive, interesting subject by itself. The other thing I would sort of say is I know there's a slight tendency sometimes for people to pick like stylized fonts because it looks kind of cute. Don't, just stick to neutrals. The thing is, text is never plain, okay? It's always dressed. And if you want a really good example of this, isn't this cute, right? You make me smile. Like, I'd love my loved one to send me a little postcard or something like with that on it, okay? I'm not sure I'd want that to be sent to me. But it's the same text, right? You see my sort of point. Try and stick to neutral ones because it really does affect the tone. Granted, I don't think anyone's going to be putting that into their, you know, like tech diagrams, but you see what I mean about pick your fonts correctly, they've got an impact. So let's talk about color. Portrait of the artist, as I don't know, his editor. So color's got some rules as well. First of all is stick to a small palette. You probably noticed this with this deck so far. I only use a handful of colors. They're mostly sort of what you call a, we'll go through color theory on the next slide, but they're mostly sort of what you call a sort of square selection of them. Point is that they all contrast with each other, and then I'll also use highlights of gray as well on it. The point is there's not very much going on with here, because the more you introduce, the more it's going to start fighting with each other as well. There's also, again, for reasons I'll let you guys dig into color theory in your own time, but there's only like so many positions on a color wheel you can do before they start being the same. Like, I mean, I think we're all probably aware there's only so many colors that exist. The next thing is make sure your palette contrasts as well. Probably harking back a bit, I should have put the IBM deck on here, but I see this an awful lot where people use complements instead, which is fine in terms of general branding, but we want stuff to pop. You want it to jump out at you. That's the whole sort of point here. So if you've got colors which are basically the same, they're not going to contrast. And a real big thing to remember that with is the background, right? Dark pops on light and light pops on dark. You see with these, I've made a point of doing it so these all stand out, right? So another thing on this, not all colors are equal, and they grab your attention in different orders. If you remember the order, it's basically Roygabiv from school, remembers that. Richard of York gave battle in vain. Bugger. I don't know what the B and the G would be in this sort of situation. In terms of how they group together, this is kind of what I'm getting at. Basically, the way palettes are picked, more or less, is that there are certain rules to do with how colors all coordinate with each other. Again, would implore you guys to go and have a look at color theory. I'll put some links out as to some good things to read on this. If you're not quite sure what to pick as your palette, by the way, Adobe and plenty of others actually have palette generators which will pick things for you based on these principles, and they will jump to the other side of the color wheel and find like the perfect opposite, and then they'll also split it out into complements as well, so you'll have a nice little variety of them. Be careful with your palettes though. Just like text has issues, so does color. Something like 4 to 8% of men and something like 0.5% of women are colorblind. There's various different conditions which affects people for this, but really the long and the short of it is that if you are not colorblind and pick a palette, this is going to be distorted in quite a substantial way. And if this is the primary way that you're marking stuff out, it's going to be lost. Okay. Now, fortunately, there are tools to do things with. There's a thing, David Nichols is a PhD student from the University of Connecticut, I think, who has built a simulator which basically will show you for various different forms of color blindness what your palette is going to look like. I use this quite extensively. Also, you don't have to come up with it yourself. There are plenty of pre-made palettes for this sort of thing as well. The IBM one, the Bang Wong, yes, actual name, pardon me, and Paul Toll's one as well. What I also recommend to everybody is just don't make color the sole way that you're highlighting things. We're going to talk about diagrams in a moment, but just don't make it the sole highlight mechanism. To give you an example of how you can do this without it, if anyone's a fan of XKCD or XKCD What If, you notice something about Randall Munro's designs, they're all monochrome. There's very little color, if any at all, in them, and he represents a lot of complex information in it. Granted, that's a whole thing into itself, which again, I could spend an entire talk talking about. But if you want to make sure your stuff is really accessible, you could just make it monochrome. So let's talk about diagrams. So text's partner in crime, as it were. So the same rules still apply here. Clean minimalism, small contrasting palette, and stage your information. I would contend these things are even more important now. Remember that system design diagram from the beginning? That thing, that's the beast you've got to tame here, right? There are some new rules. The first one is have a consistent visual language. And I realize that's a sort of archaic, wordy sounding thing. What I mean by that is just have something that's easy to read, basically. What you want to establish with your user is having the same icons and colors which actually denote things. If you go and have a look at any of those fancy keynote speeches that people give out, or like, well manicured systems diagrams, you'll notice that all of the iconography all follows a similar sort of format. Right? The colors all actually mean something. They all like, blue always means like services, green means a load balancer, etc., etc. Right? That's what I mean by a visual language. And so I also bring with this a few tenets of thou shalt not. Right? And I will come after you now you've been warned about this. First one is no low resolution images. My God. Right? I see these all the time. It distracts from the rest of your deck, particularly if everything's high def. It just looks very unprofessional. No. The next one is no animations. There is a particular demographic of manager who are obsessed with 3D animations in particular. Again, no, I say, we will not stand for it. Not least, if you want a more specific why no animations, signal and noise. This thing is wobbling on in the background and doing its little thing there. I mean, granted, this is reasonably succinct, so this one isn't too bad. But, you like animated cogs and things I've seen before. It's distracting from everything else. Signal and noise, remember. Don't mix styles. Again, this is something I've seen as well. Don't mix your drinks either, but especially don't do this. The amount of times I've seen like 3D stuff mixed with like monochrome and then randomly there's a background on there as well. Again, this is just for a look of you like presenting things out. It looks remarkably unprofessional if you have mixed styles and low resolution stuff. Again, think about like any sort of keynote stuff you've seen. Think about those of you who are in more sort of client facing stuff. Think about what you've seen with that. It never looks like this, and this is the reason why. And the final sin is no backgrounds. Okay, the worst offender with all of this, I see this all the time, where people have the transparent checkered pattern on there and seem to think that I have missed that it's on there. That does not make it invisible. Or little nod to our Redis hosts here. You've got the Redis host with grey around it. That's not a background. I don't care if my background is white. That has not disappeared. Right, the React one I have a little bit of time for. That's a light one. That's not going to show up better on here. Still not an excuse, right? You can find a version of that that's a PNG without a background, put it into Photopea, which is an online version of Photoshop, flip the colors, and you can make it dark mode immediately. Or there'll be a dark mode version of it. For that matter, don't put the blooming name of it in there as well. I see this again on systems diagrams a lot, where people seem to just need to tell me what the name of it is. Just write it in blooming your text underneath there. Okay, he calms down.
Hey, please read this one.
Yep.
Old one.
Oh, is that the? Oh, yeah, because you've got the new fancy one. Wow. Even more for reason to get rid of it. So let's talk about visual metaphors for a minute, because I'm going to give some practical examples of this. Again, you see the same thing I was doing last time, where we're color coding to what we've got on the screen. And by the way, so what this diagram is going to be all about is how we use hashes in blockchain, actually, to go back to, again, no SHA-256 in there. So how do we use hashes in blockchain? Right, I assume we all know what a hash is, like from the early thing, fingerprint of data. We all remember that, okay? So blockchains are composed of basically these groups of transaction commits, basically. That's literally what a block is. And what you do is you make a hash out of all the records in that block, okay? But it's not just that. You also make a hash out of the ones behind it. So you'll notice what we're doing here with the way this is structured and with the coloring as well. Everything feeds into the next one. Very good visual metaphor for how these all feed together, especially if we look at orange, that comes from blue, and therefore by extension, orange is based on all of the records before it, right? Now, that's basically how the actual cryptography works. There's metadata which points between them, but basically that's the actual security bit. Now, if we sort of do this as well, what do we use hashes for? Notice again, orange, which we're color coding to the final version of the hash. Green is the what the fuck is that, basically. Pardon my French, I shouldn't be swearing on this, but you get the picture, right? That's what I was saying. In terms of doing systems diagram, this is just a really trivial one because I had to draw this all from scratch. I actually very often use abstract shapes. So remember when you're talking about having a consistent visual language? This is often really handy if you need to describe something a bit arcane or complex, but you don't want to use specific images. And also because this saves you having to actually find the iconography for specific system bits and make sure they're all the same type. You notice again, use of color here. Purple always means a service, but you notice it also, we're representing that with a square. So if you're colorblind, you don't have to know, you just have to look for the squares and you know that that's the thing. So let's talk about this beast then. So what we're going to do about this. So let's say that this data analytics component, I need to introduce this stuff. Remember how I was saying staging content, right, and directing it? Honestly, what I would do, grey the thing out like that, okay? Reason for that is we've got the context of the whole thing. Now, I've made this quite grey. You could make it a little bit less to show it. The point is now we have the context of the entire diagram for you to still see. You can see where it's in there. We've isolated this part, and now I can talk. Is this actually going to do it in time? Yeah, and now I can talk my way through what we're building and why, and give a little speech on that. But the point is that you've got the attention right there with the context of it too. So we're going to finish off by talking about page layouts. So big thing you guys need to understand here is called the rule of thirds. If anyone's got a digital camera, you might have noticed there's a setting where you get this thing appearing on there, the sort of funny like window pane. What's it? So where all the thirds is a thing from, well, it's visual art generally, but photography, it's where it's most common. And basically what you do is you divide the page into 9 evenly spaced boxes, okay? And the idea is that you place all the content along these lines, basically, or you place them at their intersections, so either side of that. And what this is all about is that when I talk about weight in terms of the image, so yeah, that can obviously mean like literal weight of a font, how thick lines are, that sort of stuff. But very commonly, we're talking about the mass of the image. Where's all the stuff centered? And what this means is you center it across these, in the middle of them, basically. So to give some examples from this deck, again, you notice all the headings, we focus them down here. With the content here, again, focused in those 2 latter ones over there. A lot of my stuff tends to be on this side, as worth saying. Again, notice where the weight is all positioned with all of this. And one more example. So this is going 2 ways. First of all, we are doing horizontal weight, and then we're also doing vertical weight. But you see my points here in terms of how it's aligned with these lines, basically. This is running between them, this is running down them, okay? And that basically, the reason you do this, it distributes what's on your page very nicely. It doesn't feel like anything's like jumping into it too much. So as we're saying, the other way signals are often lost is monotony. With the best will in the world, just having colored headings is not going to make your deck interesting or different, okay? And if you keep doing this over and over and over and over and over again, that will also get bored. You basically just have a wall of text at this point as well, okay? You need to have a bit of variation to keep things fresh. Now, that doesn't have to be big. Remember these 2 slides? I would argue that these are identical. I mean, they literally are. You've got title, checklist, and a little subtitle beneath it. The only difference is that the font's a little, coloring is a little bit different, and this has got a background. That's it, right? Incidentally, adding backgrounds are a really easy way to freshen things, by the way. I love doing this because it breaks stuff up. I mean, people like seeing stuff. It can be quite good fun. You can also, it's a good opportunity to introduce some silly images as well. Jackie Chan has been like the representative of all sorts of confused architects and developers over the years. The man has done our community such a service. But I mean, they're also just fun, you know, that's the thing with it. So likewise with visual metaphors, okay? So you saw the sort of signal noise ratio, saw the stop at the beginning. Other stuff I always like to do, have like a little dictionary definition of something, have like a this and this and this, you know, sort of little equation to do stuff. And also you can do stuff like telegraphing. So that's why I said next to your floating paragraphs, you have your little icon, because that like telegraphs what it is, tells you them. That said though, do be sparing of this. Like much as I'm sort of saying like, you know, with the best will and don't copy and paste it, it is worth you having a baseline and injecting this here and there. So you'll notice that a lot of my slides tend to follow the same sort of thing, and I do this here and there. Think about, this is the links I was going to share with everybody. There's actually loads of resources for getting stock images. So almost everything that you saw today was from Pexels or Reshot. You can get all of that royalty free. You don't need to do a citation. There's stuff like FreePick as well, where you do, but it's literally just say, you know, copyright, blah, blah, blah at the end of your deck. But between Pexels, Wikimedia Commons, and like the rest of this, you can genuinely find a royalty-free stock image for anything. Like Pexels has pictures of ghosts running around with sunglasses on it, like you know, and like people dressed as bananas riding scooters. Like it's genuinely anything you want is on these pages, basically. So I guess you can use ChatGPT for stuff, but I guess why I bring this up is that I found that between these sources, and also Photopea is basically Photoshop, but in a browser. Figma, anyone working with designing might know that, but you can edit SVGs with that really well. Between all of this stuff, I guess I've always found what I need, and I've never needed to use generative stuff, basically. Also because this is all super high definition as well.